This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Yeah, especially in the 6th round, that's your biggest concern about a prospect. Yep. Now, you can live with that, right? That feels like a more fixable problem than other problems you may address in that round or have in that round with prospects. Yep. Real quick, we kind of wanted to talk about this Jed Wills thing because this Jed Wills situation is interesting. The 5th-year option deadline is Tuesday for him, and the Browns have not picked it up. And it kind of got in my head the way we were talking about Dwan Jones, right? And some of the same issues that we see with Jed Wills, where it just doesn't seem like the motivation it has quite been there. He's kind of just plateaued since his rookie year. Yep. If you're the Browns, is this a situation where you're like, maybe you want him on a contract year versus getting that extra year option, and then you just live with whatever you get there? Like, is this we feel like we will get better play out of him that last year of his contract versus if he were here for 2 years on a 5th-year option?
It's fair to think that. It certainly is, because I think that they think he's comfortable. Like, I don't, all of this is conjecture. I just know that if I'm watching tape and I see him quitting plays, I see him not finishing consistently, I see him doing things that would drive a coach crazy, I have to think Callahan and these guys are so stumped and frustrated, because I think the world of the athlete and lineman that Jedrick Wills can be and sometimes displays. Like, I truly think, and if you go talk to people that do this for a living, focusing on O-line, like Brandon Thorne on Twitter does a great job, and he does the O-line summits and all this stuff. He is as entrenched in offensive line play as I've ever seen. He thinks Jed Wills, just like I do, is a phenomenal talent. The problem is the display of the talent, the consistency, and the drive, and that has not shown itself so far. So as to say, like, I'm not here to say they're not picking it up. They could pick it up tomorrow morning. I don't know. I certainly understand that you can go from decent to average tackle to a bad one and break your team up in a heartbeat. So there's danger to this decision, just letting him go after his 4th year. We know that Tennessee regretted letting Conklin go after his 4th year when the Browns signed him. They didn't pick up his 5th-year option. It is risky, but I also know that they might just be so over it and frustrated with him that they might not pick it up, and they say, we'll run it out. Now, if you blow it up, we'll try to sign you back. We'll do whatever we can to get you back if you have a great year, but we don't have enough trust in you to give you 12 of, I don't know what the number is for the franchise signing guys at the tackle position, but I think it's like 13 million or something like that, close to it. We don't believe you just to lock you in for 13 million. We don't believe in you at that. You haven't given us enough yet. So I think there's people on both sides of this fence. This is what Jed has brought out. I'm sure you can attest some wide variety of opinions on one way or the other.
Oh yeah.
Some people believe it's like laughable to think that they would give him this. He's so bad. He's got these highlights that are terrible. Then there's some people who think they would just be absolutely the dumbest thing in the world not to pick up his 5th-year option. I'm here to tell you, I'm very much in the middle. I could see where their emotion about it, how they feel about him, would not surprise me in any way. So if it comes out that Tuesday's passed and they said we're not picking it up, wouldn't be surprised. They picked it up, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that there's a chance that the Callahans of the world and the Scott Peters, those guys who are doing offensive line with him, they don't love his body of work. And there's a chance to me that they're driven crazy by the person who just seems like he could do without football at times. He just doesn't love it. He doesn't play like he's having fun. Put it that way. Like, he just loves what he's doing. And you don't have to always be that type of guy, right? You don't have to be that way. But when you grow up 6'4", 270, 280, get to 290, and there's people telling you, man, this is what you're going to do. Some guys, believe it or not, Quincy, don't just love playing offensive line. They are just told to do it because they're big and they're gifted. And this is, again, directly back to Dwan Jones. But, like, they're just told to do it, and they're like, all right, I'll do it because my body tells me I should. I could probably be pretty good at it. I could get college paid for. I could get some money in the league. And that doesn't, when you start getting against the best the world has to offer the other side of the ball, it catches up with you. And I think that the fear is he doesn't care enough about it, especially you're questioning giving him a $13 million fifth year to give him a 90, 100, $110 million contract. That's where it gets even scarier. So, like, I certainly understand why there's fear in investing in him beyond just the 10th pick.
And it's always interesting, right? There's two things I want to touch on. Like, one, like I've been there in my life where it's like, oh, I thought I loved something, pursued it professionally, and then realized, nah, I just like being good at it, right? And that happens a lot with these draft picks where you think they love football, but it's just because they've been so dominant at football that they've never really had it tested. And what it was they liked being good at something, right? And maybe Jed at Alabama liked being good at football, but in the NFL where he's much closer to average, and still a hell of a thing to be average in the NFL at that position, because not a lot of guys are. Maybe that doesn't do it for him, right? And he's not motivated to take the steps to go forward and be exceptional like he probably could. But Jed is interesting because you brought it up. It's not exclusively about his level of play, right? It's about how you feel about his level of play. And he falls into that range of player that absolutely drives fan bases crazy, because people think that the players the fans hate are the ones that stink. No, it's the ones that are good enough to make you upset. Like, you got to be good enough to frustrate people at times, right? We've seen this, like Donovan Peoples-Jones falls into this category sometimes during the season where he's so good that he can get himself into a position to make an incredible catch, but then just doesn't finish it. And you're like, you want to strangle your television set, right? Jed Wills is so good that he can get himself in position to make some good blocks, but then he just stops. And you're just like, wait, what's going on with that, right? Corners are also another source of this, right? Where your corner is just good enough to be on the field, but not necessarily good enough to be as good as the other guy across from him. So he always gets burnt and you're always disappointed. Jed is like in that perfect mix. And I think the player that's similar to him, and you see what Cincinnati's doing right now, they kind of regret the 5th-year option, Jonah Williams, right? Jonah Williams is a guy who's similar class of tackle that Jed Wills was, also another first-round pick. Now, he got hurt very much early in his career, but I mean, we get excited when Miles plays against Jonah Williams, right? Because of some of the mismatch stuff that we have against there. And you saw that the Bengals were just tired of it at that point and decided to give Orlando Brown Jr. a ton of money and, you know, pay on the other side. And now they're talking about moving him to right tackle for a couple weeks while they wait for the guy that they signed last year to get healthy. And it's like, these are the dudes that cause teams to do things a little bit more irrational, because it's not that they're not good. It's that they are good enough to be out there, right? If Jed Wills was not good enough to be out there, we wouldn't be this frustrated. But the fact is, like, you can't not play him. Like,
it should be something more. That if the players who you think should be able to, based on their God-given ability, do something more, and you feel like they're wasting that God-given ability in some way, it drives people nuts. And you know, I know, like you're saying, is spot on about the fans. The coaches, I think they feel the same way, man. I really do. They have to be so. I feel like Callahan is probably just sitting there talking to Peters, as assistant coach, about like, we can't figure this guy out. Like, we cannot figure out how to get him to do these things that we want him to do, because they're such a stickler for technique. They're such a stickler for doing the little things right. And like, he just doesn't do those things right. And it's maddening. So yeah.
How much he just showed up on his tape at Alabama?
You know, I don't recall all of it.
This being
now,
problem,
remember,
right?
The problem was that they were with Tua and they ran a lot of that quick game. They were an RP. The ball was out fast. There wasn't blocking for 4 or 5 seconds the way it is here. So that's an element of, like, you don't really know that stuff until you see it all the time. And it is really not translated in a way you would hope, man. So he went from playing in a system where the ball was out, boom, oftentimes under 3 seconds. Not at all. It's not. And it even wasn't with the guys who weren't even to the level of Deshaun. So he's got, it's
going to be a different,
because
I feel like this really started popping up the last couple of years. Like, and even in 2020, like, we weren't talking about this, right? Like something.
His rookie year there was some of it his rookie year, but not, it's content where you think it would go the opposite direction. it has found itself to be a continued problem.
And maybe this is a dude who just needs to be on a team that's winning. Like, is that the problem? Is that if the team ain't winning that much, he's a front runner? You know, like
possible. He's an enigma, big video gamer. I don't know. Like, I really just don't. My heart sound lame, but like, I just don't think he loves football, and I think that is the only like if you're a guy that loves it and you love burying people and you love the violence of playing O-line, you'd never do these things he's doing wrong. Like you never do them, but he does them because it feels to me it's like the mentality from him is got my job done. I'm good. I did what I was supposed to do. I'm not gonna help anything else. I did my job for 4 seconds, and then we see what happens.
Yeah, I think he's a dude who can't be on a team that stinks. Like he just he doesn't love it enough to be on a team that doesn't have like playoff hopes, and he can get excited about it that way. I think he's pretty like, I don't know if he doesn't like football, but like it's clear to me like he's kind of a front runner about it, right? Like where it's like once the team's out of playoff contention, we see this stuff like burst out the seams from, right? Because most of this stuff came from like the last 5 weeks of the season this year, a lot of it from the end of the season the year before, and it's like it just seems to pop up. What about that James
point
Hudson?
You just made is good. The point you just made is good because I was talking about Kevin Clark earlier on The Ringer, talking about those players, the character concerns. Another element he talked about, which I thought was really good, is like a guy gets they're talking about this guy just can't play on a losing team. He's a bad locker room environment guy. He doesn't put up the effort on the field when they like some guys. And again, a guy who won in high school like Jed, a guy who goes to Bama and they win all the time. You go to Cleveland and things just aren't gravy the way they used to be. Yeah. There's an element to some guys cannot play that way. Yes.
Everybody love football until they start losing, right? Like then all of a sudden it's real easy. And I think a lot of people at home, they've had that experience of like, oh, you thought you loved something. It was because you were good at it. And in a second, you being good at it didn't matter. All of a sudden, you're not as motivated to do it, right? It's like going to the gym. The first month is great because you're constantly going up in weight and you're hitting new maximums and all that. But then once you get to the month 3 or 4 and you stop getting gains and it starts getting like you got to do those half weight increments, all of a sudden you realize you don't like doing this as much, right? And for some people, that's what it is for football. Real quick, I want to hit on James Hudson because I'm wondering it doesn't seem like they think the future for him is at left tackle. They just drafted DeJuan Jones. So what do you think the future is for him? Is this a we're not in love with what we're seeing out of him kind of move, especially when you pair it with the Jack Conklin extension that would go through the end of his rookie deal?
Yeah, I think there's reason to be concerned about what they think of him. Now, he actually had last year, he started for Jack. He had a great opening game and then a not so great second game. And then they would bring him in sort of at the end of some games when, I don't know, like they seemed to bring him in. Either Jack was kind of beat up by the end of a game, they'd bring him in, or if like there was a couple times where they just pulled Jed off the field, like he was bad in those late games. But again, you're coming off the bench after watching it for 3 quarters. Yes. That's not a fair way to judge. I think that there's still reason to think he could be a swing tackle, a downlight. Like, I don't know that there's ever a starter there. Maybe he develops from. I don't want to rule out anything for the guy going into his 3rd year. But I certainly see why they're taking more tackles. They see where the end of the road is for Conklin, and the uncertainty with Jed on the left side. It does mean you want to have more lotto tickets and talented players there than you had before. So I see where they're coming from with it. So Hudson signs would point to him not. I don't see some giant clear path for him to become a starter, but that doesn't mean that can't still be a valuable spot starter and swing tackle player in the future. So I think there's a lot to figure out about him in his next year, 3rd year, about like where they're playing him in practice. Are they moving him around? What are they doing? I'm not ready to give up on him by any means, and I'm not saying you are either. I think that there's reason to have some concern about, do they see him as a viable answer at either one of those tackle roles?
Yeah. It's, and also you have to ask yourself the question, like, hey, if they're not going to keep Jed Wills past this year, then what's the plan at left tackle? Because that's before you have a 1st round pick available to you. You're going to be limited in what you could do in the off season when it comes to that position, and you have a very expensive quarterback, you don't necessarily want to just throw out a bargain bin left tackle for a year while you wait to get a left tackle in the draft the year after. And who knows what that class is going to be, right? We don't even know that's going to be a good class, because the hope is that the Browns don't have a top 10 pick in that draft, right? Like that we're picking like in the 20s. So it's not even a guarantee that even if the class is good at the top, that you get yourself a left tackle at that position, at that pick. So again, that's another part of this conundrum with Jed Wills is like, okay, if you don't want to do the 5th-year option on him right now, then what do you do at left tackle after that? Because we're not going to have money to get the best left tackle available in free agency.
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, you hope that like you fall into a trade that can make sense. Like if a guy like a bargain bin type comes available, I think that they're preparing for that doomsday type of scenario the best they can with DeJuan and trying to figure some things out there. But yeah, I don't have a great answer for it. You would have to try to look at like the second round of that next draft and see if there's more answers inside of it. I think they just really wish Jed could figure it out to make this situation a lot easier. Like it's going to put them in a rough spot if Jed is not the guy in the future based on what they spent on him and watching Wirfs and watching Andrew Jones and some of these others, but Kai Becton just plays. He's good when he plays. So I think if he's healthy, he'll clearly be out there. But yeah, I mean, it would have to be the free agency route. I mean, and you got to hope that you can find a guy at the mid tier of free agency, not the Orlando Jones price tag, but the mid tier who can do it. Yeah, it would. We've gotten spoiled. Offensive line play, the Browns organization has been good for a decade. We've been spoiled. And there's going to be a time before we know it where they're actually going to be. We saw a little bit of it with the left tackle situation when the Browns brought in, who was the Desmond Harrison was starting at one point at that spot for a minute.
Greg Robinson
was doing it. So they tried to, like, that's the path that we would have to see them go.
With the
reclamation projects and free UDFA types or mid to late round draft picks.
The funny thing is, if you end up in that mid-tier left tackle free agency conversation, you know who you're looking at, right? You're looking at Jed Wills.
Yeah, well, that's actually true. But it's funny that it just seems like none of those guys end up sticking with their original organization. That's what's the weird thing. It's like that if you don't give them a massive extension, you just let them walk, and you're not interested in bringing them back for a mid-tier cost. Like it's weird that way. I've always thought that's weird that way.
That is why this is fascinating, because it's like the only other, like Jed Wills is not a great option, but if you get to free agency without a left tackle, he might be your best option. And it's like, you would save yourself money if you did the 5th-year option, but I can understand why they won't want to do it.
Yep.
I think this is the battle that they're having in Berea right now. Like
100%. That's why they're planning doing that. That's why maybe there's some dissension about taking DeJuan, but we're doing this because we need this type of card that we could play. I think the most likely outcome is this 5th-year option's picked up. He ends up doing it, and then even if it's not, he plays out the full year. Franchise tag stuff comes into play. Like that's where I think it ultimately ends up going, where they don't want to give him a long-term deal, but they're willing to stomach 1-year cap hits until, they have a perfectly defined picture of what he is as a player.
It's going to be interesting.